welcome all of you on behalf of Georgian Institute of Politics. Some of you probably know about GIP, but some who doesn't know, I'll just very briefly introduce the organization. It was founded in 2011. It's non-partisan Georgian think tank. We work in several areas, including democratization, good governance, Europeanization, foreign policy and security issues. Time to time, we're working also on youth leadership and some other programs, but this is a kind of our main concentration so far. I also would like, I'm very happy to be part of this very timely discussion today. And as you know, this is very important as since the launch of the Eastern Partnership almost like 10 years ago, when Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine actually signed the association agreement with the EU. And since then, they experienced remarkable development in relations with the EU. These three countries, so-called associated trio, they have, I would say, their desire to have a little bit closer contact with the European Union with different frameworks, including EU+3, which was actually supported by European Parliament as well as Euronest Parliamentary Assembly. However, as you all know, that at this moment, top EU level, idea of higher degree of relationship between these three countries continues to be met with caution. Interestingly, they hailed as a geopolitical, the new Commission raised hopes to deliver strategic guidance for the EU's enhanced geopolitical engagement in East, recharging pro-European reform agenda. However, EU's most recent strategic document, as you all could observe, European Commission communication and EU Council conclusions on Eastern Partnership, at least from what we see from the region, lack concrete political direction and significant upgrade of the format. Of course, there is a wish from the three associated countries to have more deepening relations with EU. However, what we see is at this moment, EaP has been shaped around the mainstream policies, including climate change with EU Green Deal and digitalization. This is exactly the reason why we have this meeting today, and to somehow to reflect the EU and Eastern Partners cooperation within the sectoral dimensions. And GIP, with partnership with CEPS, decided to launch series of discussion, EaP Beyond 2020 online discussions, which actually backed with comprehensive research aimed providing insightful analysis and policy advice to those working on upgrade of the Eastern Partnership format. Having said that, I would like to, it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Emerson, who most of you probably know, but for some who doesn't know, he's the Associate Senior as a Research Fellow at CEPS, and he's also the leader of the project called 3D CFPS.
And greetings to everybody from Brussels, from the Centre for European Policy Studies, CEPS. I'm not actually there. Most of us, I guess, are home working. That's certainly the case for us still here. CEPS, well, you mentioned, Kornely, a bit about your institute. CEPS is definitely the oldest think tank in the European Union, founded in 1982. Now there are many, but we may be one of the best, I hope, still. So we are very glad to be opening up this collaboration with the Georgian Institute for Politics. As some of you are aware, CEPS, with partners in Kiev, Chisinau, and Tbilisi, have been working for some years on the association agreements and DCFTAs. And the issue now, as we see it, is how to find ways to give enhanced momentum and impetus to these association agreements, given the political impasse over no membership perspectives, which is a fairly formidable political roadblock for reasons you will understand. So the question is, what other methods can be devised to enhance these agreements? And this is where this webinar comes in, because in our view, a number of sectors, a small number of sectors, the digital sector for one, and the energy, environment, climate nexus and Green Deal is the second. These two sectors are the best candidates for significantly enhanced substantive momentum in the content of these agreements. So that is why this particular webinar with Georgian interlocutors is very, very pertinent. And I've seen also the very useful paper which Bram de Botselier will be presenting in a moment, which begins to sketch how the EU and the three associates might develop strongly their climate cooperation. However, there's a huge amount to be done. I just mentioned the word sketch. His paper is already quite substantial compared to official documents, but it's still a sketch. So this seminar can mark maybe the beginning of a deeper development of this affair. And I look forward to hearing also how my colleague at CEPS, Irina Kustova, will handle this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to introduce our moderator today, who is Ms. Irina Kustova. She's a researcher at CEPS in Brussels, where she works on various issues concerned on energy transition and energy security. Prior to joining CEPS, she worked at the Energy Charter Secretariat on Transit Provisions and Regional Electricity Cooperation. She also held assignment on the Agency for Cooperation of Energy Regulators and Delegation on the European Union to Russia. Irina received her PhD cum laude International Studies from University of Trento and her MA in European Studies from Maastricht University. During her PhD, she has also spent periods as visiting research fellow at the King's College London and Energy Research Institute of Russian Academy of Sciences. Her work has been published in such journals as Journal of Contemporary European Research, Cooperation of Conflicts, Journal of European Integration, Journal of World Law and Business. She also have extensive works on EU Green Deal. Having said that, I would like to hand over Irina, floor to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kakachia, and this is my pleasure to moderate this event, given that the topic is very important with rising pressures on climate mitigations. The efforts of the European Union to promote, to enhance the Green Deal and policy commitments of the neighboring countries and Georgia in particular to enhance climate actions. And I think it's very timely to discuss nowadays how to substantiate, if I may say, the external dimension of the Green Deal and how to figure out what solutions can help promoting the climate agenda in the neighborhood and to avoid, for example, regional trade distortions, for example, in electricity trade and trade in carbon-intensive goods. And of course, there are emerging opportunities and also challenges. And today we are discussing how the international engagement of Georgia in particular and other countries of the region as well has been translated into policy developments at the domestic level and what opportunities for further cooperation with the European Union are in place. So I'm very happy to introduce our distinguished speakers today. First of all, Bram de Botselier from College of Europe will present his research findings of his recent research paper. And after that, we will open the floor to Šarūnė Kubiliūtė, Deputy Head of Mission Embassy of the Republic of Lithuania to Georgia. And she will discuss EU-Georgia cooperation on a variety of issues on climate change, spotting up the success stories and also opportunities for further engagement. And then Maia Tskhvaradze, acting head on the Climate Change Division of the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture of Georgia, will reflect upon Georgia's commitments and harmonization processes under the EU-Georgia Association Agreement. And before I pass the floor, I give the floor to Bram. I have just small organizational issues. So, dear participants, we welcome you to ask questions to our speakers by using the Q&A section in the Zoom and in the end of the webinar we will collect all questions and we will pass them to our speakers. Please do not forget to indicate, to mention to whom particularly you address your question, if you opt to do so. And also in the end of the session, we may have an opportunity for intervention by voice. So I will remind you that you will need to raise your hand using the Zoom function and we will let you speak. So now we are moving to Bram's presentation and the floor is yours, Bram. You have 15 minutes. Please, you're welcome.
So, hello, good morning, everyone. I will try to share a presentation. So I hope this is visible for everyone. Good morning. So I will be presenting the results or the findings of a paper on establishing an Eastern Climate Partnership to enhance global ambition. And to make the case a bit more concrete, I will focus on EU-Georgia cooperation on climate change as an example. So the pattern that I will follow, the structure of the presentation will be as follows. So first I will go into why exactly such an Eastern Partnership to enhance global ambition would actually be beneficial from the EU side. Then I will go into EU-Georgia cooperation and the current state of affairs. And then I will discuss room for improvement and some suggestions on how to do this. And then in the end, I will make some concluding remarks. As was earlier indicated, it's indeed more of a sketch of potential options and ideas. Of course, more research and more policy has to be made. But I hope that this presentation and this paper can start the debate a little bit. So just to contextualize, I think it's important that we take a step back, first of all, and that we discuss what is actually the current context of international climate negotiations. And with that, I mean the negotiations in the framework of the UNFCCC, so the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So this is the UN Climate Summit, the most famous of which, the Paris Climate Summit, led to the Paris Agreement. And this is now the agreement that the current negotiations are building on. So I think that's important that we see a little bit of a discrepancy there, because on the one hand, since the adoption of the Paris Agreement, we see that there is an increasing sense of urgency on the side of climate science, really calling for increased climate action. But on the other hand, we have the policies that have been adopted under the Paris Agreement and which are very much lagging behind. So the challenge for the Glasgow Climate Summit, which was now postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it will take place next year. So this challenge will really lie in improving this current climate plans to enhancing global ambition and to take increasing climate action. And in this, we have a very problematic observation, because first of all, we see that the key partners that were very important for the adoption of the Paris Agreement, so we have, for example, the US, Brazil, Australia, they are right now much less willing to take on this leadership role. The US under the Trump administration is the clearest example, as they have withdrawn even from the Paris Agreement. But Australia, for instance, or Brazil are also important partners that are now much less eager to participate in this enhancement of global climate ambition. And this is very problematic for the EU. The EU has always attempted to build a leadership role in international climate negotiations. And with the adoption of the Green Deal, this is, of course, even more so, that this is clearly the intention. So if the EU really wants to be successful in enhancing global ambition, in implementing and realizing these external dimensions of the Green Deal, then it needs to look for new partners, new coalitions, new countries really to cooperate with, to kind of build this alliance or rebuild a new alliance to make the Glasgow summit a success in a similar way as it has done at the time of the adoption of the Paris Agreement. So my argument is that for this, or for at least part of this coalition, the EU does not have to look very far. So of course, the Eastern Partnership as such, as a whole, would probably not work very well. Right now, there is very little or no coordination with the EU when it comes to multilateral climate negotiations. And the Eastern Partnership countries as such have very different interests in climate negotiations. A country like Azerbaijan, of course, very dependent for its economy on energy exports, has very different interests in these negotiations compared to countries like Moldova or Georgia. However, when you look at the three associated countries, the question is a bit different, or the setup is different. If you look at Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, they have obviously been themselves asking for a framework for enhanced cooperation with the EU in general, in the framework of the renewal of the Eastern Partnership. Specifically for climate change, the three countries have shown a willingness to participate in global negotiations. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, for instance, has been calling to participate in the Green Deal framework. Moldova was one of the first countries to submit an enhanced climate plan in preparation of the Glasgow summit. So we see that there is a clear willingness on the part of these countries to actually at least rhetorically commit and actively participate in these negotiations. At the same time, from the EU's perspective, the three countries are actually quite interesting, and then particularly Georgia and Ukraine, because they belong to different negotiation groups in climate negotiations. So countries, they group themselves to have a bigger say and to guide the negotiations more in their direction, to defend their interests better. And they usually team up with countries that have similar interests. And Ukraine is a part of the negotiation group called the Umbrella Group, together with Japan, Australia, the United States, Canada. While Georgia is in a group together with South Korea, Mexico, Switzerland. So there's two different groups of countries that the EU would already have access to if it would just somehow increase its cooperation with the three associated countries, and then particularly Georgia and Ukraine. And this is exactly this kind of bridging between developed countries, developing countries, emerging economies that is really key for the coalition building. The EU managed to do that successfully in the Paris Agreement. And it will have to do the same for the Glasgow summit if it wants this summit to be a success. Of course, however, this is multilateral cooperation, and multilateral negotiations always have to be backed up by domestic contributions. It, of course, does not make any sense if you, as a country, call for very strong climate action on the international stage if you are not following suit domestically. And for this, I think it is good if we look a bit on the Georgian climate policy specifically. So there has been a steady increase in interest when it comes to climate policy development in Georgia. This is, of course, because the impact of climate change is becoming more clear, especially the detrimental impact on agriculture, which is very important for the Georgian economy. Then we have interest from international donors, which have been quite keen in supporting climate policy projects in Georgia. And then we have the role of the EU-Georgia Association Agreement, which was really important to jumpstart a lot of the domestic environmental policy in Georgia. However, this also brings some problems. And then especially the reliance on international donors does not come without any downsides. Of course, if you rely on international donors, which is very much the case in the case of Georgia, for funding and so on, then you risk taking on the objectives of international donors as well, where you might ask yourself the question to what extent that these objectives are really the objectives of the Georgian government, rather than just rhetorical commitments to what international donors simply want. And this is important because for climate policy to be really effective, you need to have something called mainstreaming of climate concerns into other policies. This basically means that not only the minister responsible for climate policy has to think about climate change, but also the minister responsible for defense or interior or even justice, they all have to think about climate change and incorporate these concerns into their own policies. Of course, if the objectives taken on are just a way to please international donors and they are not really co-owned or legitimately shared by the Georgian government, this raises concerns because then you end up with rhetorical commitment, but the practical implementation will always be lagging. And this is not only a problem for Georgia, this is a problem with many countries, also developed countries, that you have this discrepancy between rhetorical commitment and practical implementation, where the practical implementation is often much more difficult because there are certain problems that arise. In the case of Georgia, there's also some other specific problems, more specifically the capacity problem on the national government level. There is, of course, the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture, which is leading the effort. But some of the competences are also split. For instance, renewable energy, which would then be more for the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development. But the ministry itself, the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture, also suffers from a lack of staff. There has been some reorganization ongoing as well recently with the reorganization of the ministries, and this of course hinders a little bit the continuity of the policy efforts. Then the solution that has been proposed to coordinate this a little bit better on the national government level has been the Climate Change Council, which was established by under the Prime Minister's office and which will be chaired by the minister responsible for the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture. This might, of course, be a very good thing. We will have to see how it works out because due to the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously everything is a little bit more delayed. But you might also argue that this Climate Change Council in itself is a little bit of a missed opportunity. This is particularly because the minister chairing the council will be the minister in charge of environmental protection and agriculture, which again means that it will be one minister of one ministry chairing this council and taking the lead in the coordination effort. While if it had been the prime minister, the chances for climate concerns to be mainstreamed again in these other policies, to be adopted and incorporated in these other policies, would have been much bigger. So this is a first missed opportunity, let's say. A second point that I think will be important is the observation that the bigger cities in Georgia, Tbilisi, Batumi, Kutaisi, they actually have quite a lot of experience already with climate action, and especially via the framework of the EU Covenant of Mayors. They even possess very technical knowledge, for instance, on reporting and tracking emissions. And this technical knowledge is not always available on the national government level or for other cities. So I think it will be important that there will be mutual learning effects and that there will be really efforts created to put emphasis on the coordination and the mutual learning between different cities, but also between different levels of government. And then the last point, to compensate for the fact that now there is a big reliance on international donors and international sources to provide information, for instance, on climate change, it would of course be very beneficial if Georgia, for its own policy making, could rely on domestic civil society organizations. And right now, Georgia has a very vibrant civil society already. But very often in the field of environment, they focus more on local issues, not so much on issues like climate change. So I think strengthening these specific civil society organizations would also really make a difference. What can the EU do in all of this? Well, the Covenant of Mayors is, of course, an EU policy, so they can easily strengthen the capacity of coordinators. Coordinators are a layer, either regional or national levels, that attempt to coordinate a little bit between the different cities. But there is usually very little effort to really make sure that this mutual learning and so on is beneficial. So I think that the EU can really strengthen this capacity so that it actually is beneficial for the national levels and especially for more rural cities which do not have similar capacities like the bigger cities to also participate in climate action. When it comes to strengthening civil society, the EU can of course reform its grant application process to actively reach out to those organizations that are active in the region. Because they're also very much needed. Their contribution to the knowledge of the impact of climate change will be very much needed. So really targeting them, making sure that assisting them in applying for the grants process and so on will also be important to really strengthen this domestic knowledge. And then finally, what the EU can also do is, of course, to put a framework to kind of organize this bilateral and multilateral cooperation. So then we have, for example, the technical exchanges in the framework of the association agreements, where you can really put more emphasis on climate, but of course, a high-level political dialogue, including not only bilateral, but also on the multilateral level, because this is really what the three countries in the way have been asking for. So it kind of be compromise towards their side. So to briefly summarize what I have been arguing is the first observation point, the starting point of the paper and the discussion now is actually that international negotiation context for the Glasgow Climate Summit is very difficult, much more difficult even than at the time of the adoption of the Paris Agreement. So the EU needs to look for new partners. And my point is that at least 3 of those partners can actually come from the EU's own neighborhood. And I argue that for the multilateral coordination effort to be effective, of course, those countries themselves, the 3 associated countries, have to show domestically that their climate plans are not just rhetoric, but that they also commit to practical implementation. And to assist them in this effort, I think that the EU can specifically increase and reinforce the bilateral cooperation by really focusing on the domestic capacity building and the creation of internal knowledge, and by also providing a framework for high-level political dialogue. So as I said at the very beginning, I think that this is an initial presentation, an initial paper that is really supposed to start this discussion. More research is for sure needed, because I also found that there is very research already available, but I hope that this will be a good starting point. And I am looking forward to all of your questions.
Thank you, Bram, perfectly on time. And thank you for your presentation. Indeed, we now need a new framework, maybe a more advanced than that one designed via the association agreement. And the European Green Deal, for example, mentions among the tools, the proposed tools in the communication, like Green Deal diplomacy, and like to establish innovative forms of engagement. And we are here today to discuss what these forms can take shape. And actually, a very good summary of the issues, opportunities, and challenges in the country. So the first question is how to empower the domestic actors. And second one, of course, how to address the capacity problem on the national government level. And it's interesting that you put an essential stress on the local actors at the local level and civil society. And now we will ask our panelists to present their vision on EU-Georgia cooperation in climate change issues, and also maybe to address the issues you have raised in your paper. So Šarūnė, please, the floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes. And also before we start, please, if you have any questions, use the Q&A section of Zoom. Šarūnė, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irina. Well, for me at least, it is a little bit difficult to speak about all Europe policy towards Georgia, but on the other hand, having in mind that Lithuania is a member of European Union, so I'll try to move smoothly through Lithuanian perspective, what we see. What is going on in Georgia and how Lithuania is doing in this case of climate change. So European Union has set itself ambitious targets to shift towards climate neutral economy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, the fight against climate change has been and will continue to be one of the most important goals of the community for many years ahead, of course. And our Prime Minister, as he was telling that, and also Lithuania adopted its plan for to reduce climate change or mitigate climate change. So Lithuania is also committed to planet and also committed to what our children will have. So this is quite important to mention. And therefore, the main targets that actually Europe has settled or it has to be completed by 2030 is to bring down greenhouse gas emission by 40% compared to 2005. Improving energy efficiency by at least 32%, and increase the share of renewable energy sources in overall energy mix up to 32% as well. So, for example, Lithuania has settled itself quite ambitious plans, and it's already achieving quite a lot. For example, as for when it comes for buildings efficiency. So it already overachieved what was planned. And for example, compared to 2005, gas emission should be reduced in Lithuania at least by 9%, and energy intensity brought down to 1.5 times. Or, for example, renewable energy sources in mixed energy is supposed to increase by 45%. And Lithuania, as I mentioned, is doing quite great deals. Having combined that, for example, even right now, Lithuania is using quite a lot biomass for energy, also solar power. And compared to Georgia, in Georgia, there are, during the year, it's more than 300 days solar days or sunny days. And in Lithuania, it's only 170 days. And having that in mind, for example, Georgia could use a lot of solar plants or solar power. Well, at this point, of course, it's using and it's investing in hydropower. However, some diversity is supposed to be taken into account, and having in mind that also wind energy is supposed to be quite well changed over here. And when it comes for the other issues, for example, forestry or even biomass, Georgia has really great deal over here, and it can help itself even by introducing those cases. For example, Lithuania already with Lithuania we have established several practices. However, it's little by little coming into Georgia, and again, it's of course the will of the government. It's one thing. Another thing is, as Bram told, capacity issues. So people are supposed to understand that it's not only government who is supposed to take the beginning steps. It's also the people who might introduce their knowledge and might introduce their willingness to share and to combat climate change. And also mentioning that it's good to mention that it's also by tackling those issues, there's opportunity to create jobs, what is also needed here in Georgia. And one of the, I would say, my favorite topics is recycling or recycling of the secondary production. Let's say bottles, cans. Lithuania actually took the example from Iceland and Scandinavian countries when it comes for deposit system, and we have been approaching actually Georgian authorities by introducing that. Of course, it has some issues with local mentality, because even in Lithuania, at the beginning, people were really against that. On the other hand, once introduced, right now we have quite great examples. It's like 92% of those recycled cans is gathered back for the deposit system. So meaning that even other European countries are willing to know how Lithuania succeeded to have that in such good numbers. So there are a lot of things we can share with Georgia and also with European Union countries. As for other things, is for example, having combined that there is a big need to reduce greenhouse gas. So over here in Georgia, being, as for myself, let's say being 3 years living here, I can see a lot of old cars. I mean, I do understand that it's not easy to get rid of old cars. On the other hand, what Georgia is doing at the moment, and I'm really happy for that. It's becoming more green efficiency, and hybrid cars are used. But here is the slight thing I should mention, that it's also needed to know what is going to be done with the batteries, let's say, or the things that might be recycled as well, and how Georgia would combat with that. Coming back to biodiversity, Georgia is a green country. So having that in mind, making the areas bigger than it's already, I mean, planting trees is one of the, could be mentioned as one of the great deals that could be done over here in Georgia. So having those points that are really easy made would be also easy for Georgia, and together with partners to play its role in all climate change system. So it's only the matter of willingness, devotedness, and the work together with the partners. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Šarūnė. And now the floor is passed to Maia, and we would like to ask, we would like to know how actually the entire process of the climate agenda formulation is taking place, and also upon your experience and your achievements.
Thank you very much, Irina. Before I go to my presentation, I would like to very briefly recall the presentations and statements. So before the presentation, so firstly, it was, and because really very important issues has been mentioned. First was the coordination issues with the European Union at the negotiations, and that there are quite a different kind of interest during the negotiations. So it is obvious because Georgia is the non-Annex 1 country, which means there is a developing country which receives the support, and the EU is Annex 1 country which is a provider of the support. So it is very usual that the needs and the interests of those two, like Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries, are different. So however, when it comes to the Georgia and the coordination at the negotiation process, as Bram already mentioned, Georgia is a member of the EIG group, which is the Environmental Integrity Group, which is one of the official negotiator groups at the UNFCCC, and it's very interesting group because it consists like 50% share of the developing and developed countries. So there is quite a well alignment between those two interests. We almost always at every COP we have the coordination meetings with the EU and UG, so on behalf of the groups. So when there is some fundamental decisions and discussions, I can say that the negotiations and the discussions are always kind of aligned and quite well coordinated. But there are, of course, like country priority issues, which could not be like the priority for the whole group. Therefore, in this case, we just go as a country by country. This is one issue, but I mean, probably I would say that coordination, of course, could be strengthened even more, and this EaP platform and association countries are quite a good platform for the European Union's perspective. There was mentioning the lack of capacities. Indeed, there are quite a strong lack of capacities in the country at the national and at the local and at the CSO level, at all level, I would say. For example, in the Ministry of Environment, there are just like 3 persons who are working on the climate change policy issues, and there are a lot of processes happening and a lot of technical and policy issues that we have to deal, all of us. So there is, there is definitely the need. At the municipal level, there is also quite a strong, though there are quite many members of Covenant of Mayors signatory countries, but at the municipal level, it is even harder, like the capacity is even lower. Especially when it comes to the technical capacity, because the municipalities, they have to develop the CEPS, which is Sustainable Energy and Action Plans. Also, they have to monitor and they have to report, which currently there is no this capacity in the municipalities, and we from the ministry, we are trying to somehow support through our different projects to work with them for the monitoring report or CEP development and etc. So yes, this is in fact the case. Also, there was mentioning the waste recycling importance, and the forest that is like the trees, that is very important source of carbon sinks in Georgia. Indeed, the waste legislation in Georgia is quite young, I would say. It was from 2015, it was officially enforced, and when it comes to the recycling, there is kind of step-by-step approach. Currently, I can say that there are some initial steps has been taken already, but there is a deadline of 2022 where I think around 5 items, which are like paper, glass, plastic, and etc., needs to be recycled. So we have this kind of deadline. Yeah, this is very briefly from to the previous presenters, like to reflect on those. As on my presentation, it is very brief, and I mainly orient on the association agreements and our commitments and where we are standing. So I'll try to share my screen now. Can you see it?
Yes, very good.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to open. Just very briefly, so the association agreements, there is one very important chapter for us, which is the environmental climate change and climate cooperation, which refers to the several important climate policy documents and alignment of the Georgian legislation and policy to the EU ones. For example, one of them is mentioning the low emission development strategy, and also the most importantly is to implement to coordinate and work together with during the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And for us, for Georgia, the Paris Agreement is the key agreement in terms of the climate, not only for Georgia, but also for almost every UNFCCC member country. So working for the implementation of the Paris Agreement is very important also to kind of align with the EU policies, because they are quite aligned with each other. I cannot move, okay. So the association agreement is split to between the short-term priorities and the medium-term priorities. In terms of the short-term priorities, there was the finalizing and adoption of the low-emission development strategy and the start implementation of the Paris Agreement. So Georgia has developed the low-emission development strategy, the draft document, quite several years ago. However, there was some technical issues due to the fact that we were not able to adopt the document. However, we made kind of slight change, and we developed the climate action plan, which is feed through the low emission development strategies, kind of analysis and the information. So we kind of try to convert that document and that very good analytical report to the plan, which is based on the government of Georgia guidelines, which is quite a strict guidelines for the policy documents. So on the start of the implementation of the Paris Agreement, so Paris Agreement timeline is 2021-2030. So it's quite a general statement. So everything starts from 2025, 2021 for us is the implementation for the Paris Agreement, and there are quite many activities and measures which are planned for that period. So we hope to cooperate on that one. On the medium-term priorities, so there are quite all of them are quite an important statement. For example, first is adopt approximate legislation of the Georgia to EU acts and international instruments envisaged by the association agreement in accordance with the relevant annexes. So this statement mainly reflects and within the agendas there is it is translated to the developing the technical regulation on certain fluorinated greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, we have drafted already the technical regulation, and we have it within the ministerial kind of technical discussion in order to proceed then with the governments for approval. Another issue is the elaboration of the updated national determined contribution. You might be aware that all the Paris Agreement member countries, they have to update their nationally determined contributions every 5 years. And every new NDC document should be more ambitious than the previous one. So our first NDC was in 2015 that we communicated to the UNFCCC, and currently until the end of 2020 we have the new deadline, another deadline for updating the document and for sending it to the UNFCCC convention. The document is already drafted. It was open for the public commenting until the July 6th. So currently we are combining all the comments. We are reflecting them into the document, and then we will adopt the document. So we hope that by the end of this year, definitely we will have this. So we are quite aligned in terms of the timelines. Another very important issue also was mentioned here at the presentations was the mainstreaming climate action into the different sectorial policies. Here we are supported also by the EU-funded project. This is called the EU for Climate, and we have identified several priority sectors for EU and also for Georgia. These are the energy, health, and agricultural sectors, and we will be developing the recommendation, not we, but within the projects, the experts will be developing the recommendations. So what is the best way to mainstream this climate action into those policies. However, I should mention that, for example, within the energy sector, we have quite a good cooperation. Also in terms of the energy community, we are working on the climate and energy action plans. So in this case, the alignment is quite strong, and we are quite well coordinated with each other. On the health sector, there is also initial work has been done, like within this previous 1 or 2 years. Particularly is that the health strategy and action plan also states and acknowledge the importance of the climate change and somehow to work on this issue and to address these challenges. Similarly with agriculture, we have, though unfortunately we have the Minister for Environment and Agriculture, but unfortunately we have quite a brief, but at least there is the statement in the strategy of agricultural development of Georgia about the importance of the climate smart agriculture and agricultural production. We now are trying to find out more kind of a deep items for mainstreaming and to go quite in more active way, not to have only like the brief statements in the strategies, which is very nice, but it is really a first step, but also to go a bit more into the strategic directions and into the different kind of subsectorial groups. Another activity was enhancing Georgia's transparency framework for climate action, in particular through the robust national system for the monitoring, reporting of the climate policies, measures, and greenhouse gas emissions based on the EU model. So some of you might be aware, it's quite a technical issue, but it is related to the MRV, so monitoring, reporting, and verification system development. We have in place quite a well-developed MRV system for the mitigation. However, we lack quite significantly in the adaptation part. Also, the transparency framework, you might also be aware that within the UNFCCC and within the Paris Agreement, the transparency framework is a new and a very important chapter. So we are working also on it to strengthen even more. And the final kind of midterm priority is the development of Georgia's mid-century long-term low emission development strategy. So in the short-term priorities, there was a low emission development strategy that timeline was 2021-2030. However, in this one, this medium term, we talk about 2050 low emission development strategy. We are also, we haven't started to work on the document yet, but we are supported here also with the EU4 climate project. So we already, there was already a tender issued. There is the organization who will support us in the development of the long-term LEDs. And we are, in 2020, we will start the process. And I hope, because we have very good basis for 2030. So the climate action plan is for this 10 years, and the the way we see it, the 2050 LEDs will be like a 10 years strategy with a longer term until 2050 term vision, because based on the government of Georgia regulations, that we cannot adopt the strategy which has like 30 or 40 years. So strategy can be adopted only for like around 10 or maximum 15 years. Therefore, we decided to go like this way, to have the 10-year strategy and the longer term vision. So this is how we will try to address this issue, to be aligned with the EU standards and the government of Georgia regulations, like in all terms. So this is very briefly about things that happen in Georgia's climate policy in alignment to the EU and association agreement. And if you have any kind of questions, please feel free to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maia. And a very nice overview, a very concise and very comprehensive overview of the current state of the art of the Georgian climate policy agenda. And now we are moving to the last section, the Q&A section, and we have received already many very interesting questions. And well, I will arrange them in some groups, so we will address most of them. And the first one will be about the EU agenda, and the EU agenda within the Eastern Partnership, for example, how to promote climate change issues in cooperation with the European Union and Georgia in this case. And what are the low-hanging fruits, the so-called low-hanging fruits in achieving any climate actions? And the question is to all participants. Who wants to take?
I can answer questions.
Georgian perspective and maybe
Maia?
Sorry, please feel free also.
Yes, I can mention, for example, when it comes for economy and including private business or private banking to facilitate climate change, let's say. Even in Lithuania and all other countries, private sector is really involved in it. And having in mind that it might produce good ideas for government and to work hand in hand with government. Well, I should mention Lithuania. So in Lithuania, we have government already made a proposal for local people. But nonetheless, it's at the beginning it was private initiative. So even though private sector was willing to boost economic-wise the energy sector, at the beginning it was difficult because lack of laws, lack of legal issues, they were all over. On the other hand, working hand in hand means that commercial part or private sector is coming with new initiatives, and especially working with let's say startups or new ideas, so it facilitates the energy sector and also in climate change. So these two parts or these two interlocutors are very close together, and then it might achieve a lot of good results. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Šarūnė. And actually, you just answered another question as well, because this question was about the role of commercial private sector in pushing for energy transition in Georgia. Thank you very much. Maia, you wanted to comment as well?
Yes, just like I would like to add a bit from the Georgia's perspective, and also maybe answer one more time the issue around the private sector. Of course, the private sector is very important for us, because we all know that it doesn't matter, or it matters of course, but it's only government can't do like everything. The green transition is not only for the government policies, but the private sector will play the critical role here. So we are absolutely aware of this, and we have initiated quite several years ago. We have initiated to a very kind of good coordination with the private sector actors, I would say. For example, together with TBC Bank and the Partnership Fund, we have started the process of accessing like climate finance at the national level. What it means is that currently also Šarūnė, sorry if I didn't mention correctly, mentioned that it is associated, I mean, green transition is associated with quite a high cost capital at the first stage. There are like very important financial instruments under the UNFCCC, for example, the Green Climate Fund, which are providing the low-cost financial resources and the long-term by the concessional financing to the countries, especially to the if this is in the national private sector entity. So we have started the accreditation process of these two. The choosing of these two entities was not like it was quite a coordinated also in this case, because we understand that not the only single private sector entity also can change the market itself. When it comes to the bank is very good option, because they are able to creating the market, including the green market. So for us, if the national banks have the direct access to the low cost concessional resources, is very important, because they will kind of they will be how to say, they will push the green market forward. So currently the TBC Bank is on the accreditation process with the Green Climate Fund. They are already on the second stage, and very soon I hope they will be accredited. So we will be able to receive the green finance, for very concessional green finance, and we will be able to even more work with the private sector for pushing the green growth. When it comes to the Partnership Fund, it is a state-owned fund. It's a private equity fund, and equity finance is also very important and very challenging in Georgia's reality, especially on the green direction. And the Partnership Fund is also working on the private sector projects, the commercial project, which has a strategic importance for the country. So for these two entities, it was also their big interest, and from our side, we were also readiness on that. So we are trying somehow to support this green transition in this way. So Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Division and Climate Change Policy, unfortunately, is not in a position to develop like strategic directions, for example, related to the energy. We only can recommend or providing some support. So when it comes for the energy policies, for example, this is a obligation of the Ministry of Economy and their energy department, and also they're working quite hard on this direction. So from the Ministry of Environmental perspective, we are trying to support this enabling environment and access to finance and etc. So in this case, I hope very soon we will have very rapid growth in the green business. So fingers crossed. Let's see. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very detailed answer. And the next question, actually two questions, are addressed to Bram. Bram, they relate to the format of the cooperation between the European Union and Georgia and maybe the region, I mean the South Caucasus. So first question is, what is the strategy of the European Union when engaging with the countries of the region? So will the bilateral approach on a country-by-country basis, or a regional approach will be more feasible and maybe more desirable? And the second question is about the cooperation between Georgia and member states. So would cooperation with some member states, maybe with more advanced climate agenda, be more feasible than the pan-European cooperation? Please.
To answer the last question first, so I think that, of course, on the bilateral level, there might be, because I saw there was also a question about the bilateral level. So, of course, then on the bilateral level, there might be cooperation on the from a development cooperation point of view more. I know that GIZ, for example, the German development organization, is quite active in these things. But of course, when it comes to the more political level and really the multilateral negotiations, we shouldn't forget that the EU negotiates really as one bloc. And then when it comes to environment and climate policy, which is a shared competence, there is always a shared negotiation. Of course, every country has its own priorities within the EU. But then when it comes to the international negotiations, you really have the lead negotiators, the shared competence between the commissioner, the presidency, or the country that holds the presidency. And then for every specific issue, you have some countries or some specific experts taking the lead. So I think in practice, it would be very hard to make a distinction between some EU member states going further, especially in cooperation with third countries, while other EU member states are lagging behind. I don't think that would be feasible. But again, on the bilateral level, especially when it comes to development cooperation, you might indeed have these kind of types of cooperation. When it comes to the cooperation with the region, as I said at the very beginning, I think it's not realistic to expect that there will be cooperation with the 6 Eastern Partnership countries together, particularly because the interests are simply too different. If you compare a country like Azerbaijan, which is really dependent on energy export and which as such has a lot less interest or to actually call for climate action, while other countries are probably, at least rhetorically, are much more committed. But again, for the 3 associated countries, I do think that they have certain things in common where cooperation might be more feasible.
Thank you very much. And the next question is addressed to Maia. Is there a broad support within the Georgian political elite for the green transition? And maybe to complement this question, Georgia adopts EU standards, but are there political channels that allow Georgia influence in EU vision on climate change? So another way, a reverse road, please.
Well, quite a complicated question, I would say, and interesting. So if I understand correctly, so the question, I'll also try to think, is there a broad support within
the political elite? So is there a consensus that the energy transition
within the government? It means within the government, right? Yeah.
Even a bit broader.
Well, I can say that the green transition, though it is of course the priority of the government, of all governments, of course, because it is really like the path that we all need to go. However, the economic team also realized that not only the government itself is able or will be able to make this transition. So establishing the Climate Change Council, which I should maybe also note, which is not under the Prime Minister, but it is the Intergovernmental Council, was a very good kind of a step forward for gaining, or I don't know, gaining the ownership of these green policies. So I cannot say that it is like at the top priority because the top priority is the economic independence and, let's say, the energy security. Well, therefore, of course, Georgia is like very oriented on the renewable energy, but when it comes to the energy security, I hope that the country will say no to the, I don't know, the gas or something at this stage, because this is the issue that is very important for us. So as far as the political and economical issues are aligned, so there is of course the will. But I cannot say that this is the only and the highest priority, unfortunately, at this stage. But with the Climate Change Council, I hope that we will have a few steps forward on this and the gaining ownership about that. The green is not like the challenge, but it is an opportunity for mainly for all of us. And the second question was, can I only adopting the EU standards, or there are any political channels?
Georgia became?
Yeah. When it comes to the EU vision itself, there is quite a lot of coordination within the EU itself to come to agree on one common thing, and I hope that in this case Georgia is able to influence the EU standards. So if I understand this correctly, at this stage at least. Maybe
Okay,
Bram,
thank you
can
very much for answering this even a bit provocative questions. And we are moving now to the second round of Q&A session. And if there is anyone who wants to raise the question by voice, please raise your hand and we will let you join the discussion. If anyone.
Okay. So we have one question right now coming from Tskhvaradze. Allowing her to talk, and ask her to ask her question.
Yes, hello everyone. If I'm heard well, first of all, thank you to all the presenters and researchers for working those crucial important topics for us. It was really, really very interesting and insightful. As for my question is about the specific case of Georgia, and maybe Georgian speaker in this case is more like concerned in those issues, but also if some other international speakers could reflect on my question, it would be really interesting to listen their opinion as well. So we are having a very actual kind of challenge or debates about building big dams in different regions of Georgia, which proposes somehow to transfer the Georgian economy, Georgian energy capacity to be more diversified, to be more independent, to be more capable. But on the other hand, we are having many like side effects, such as threat of extinctions of some very unique ecosystemic givens in Georgian regions. More concrete example and more recent example is the Raja region, where like the unique wine species of Tsolikauri is going to disappear as a result of those dam building processes. So how, if you have followed this question, how the issue is seen from the lenses of international experiences and legal frames and even cooperation terms, how we look at this issue, how we should look at this issue as such. Thank you very much, and listening carefully. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And who wants to address this question? Maybe Maia?
I will try to address, however, it's not a direct climate policy perspective competence. It would be very good if we had on board the Ministry of Economy and the Energy Department, who is responsible for the energy policy. Of course, from climate, like purely from UNFCCC perspective, the renewable energy is really good, and the dependence on which reduce the dependence on the coal and on the gas. However, on the other side, of course, we should avoid such a negative influence on the biodiversity, especially.
You are muted. I'm sorry, Maia. You muted yourself. Yes.
Sorry.
Great.
Yeah, did I speak too much or muted?
Just repeat the last sentence.
So what I was saying that from climate perspective, though the renewable energy is very important, and also the energy independence is very important for the country, and it reduced the dependence on the dirty energy, which is the coal and gas. Now, however, on the other side, it's very important to avoid this negative influence on the biodiversity and especially on the endemic species. Now, I'm not sure if the Raja, it was mentioned that there was already extinction of the very important species in the Raja, because the HPP in the Raja region is currently ongoing and we don't know whether it will be built or not. So as it was stated, it was already the results there. So this is not the case as far as I'm aware at this stage. But more on detailed and more policy perspective. So I'm not the climate policy is not that one that can respond to this question directly, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. And thank you, our panelists, for answering all these interesting questions. And we are going to conclude now. And before I pass the floor to Michael Emerson for general conclusions and a bit of visionary observations, I would like also to mention that we will follow up with an email and we will send Bram's paper when it's published, yes. And you can also contact Bram by email and also ask other questions, additional questions that may be interesting for you. And now I would like to pass the floor to Michael to conclude our meeting today. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Irina. I'm not going to try to summarize the debate, which is very interesting. There's a good paper there, which I guess can be made available, Bram's paper. But I was a little bit frustrated because I wanted to ask a question about the hydroelectric capacity, and maybe I can abuse
you're welcome.
the floor now just to see what Maia and Elena have to say on the huge but hugely controversial question of Georgia's underexploited hydroelectric potential. We know the potential is there, and we know that the ecological consequences are considered very serious and are contested. So what is it, where does this lead to? Maia, first of all, is the government actually going ahead with major new hydro projects or not?
This is a very direct question for me, and once again I should mention that the question is mainly directed not to the climate policy, which I am responsible to, but more on the energy part. And the environmental impact permits that are provided from the government of Georgia, in particular from our ministry and from that side. What I am aware is that all power plants are going through the environmental impact assessment, and then they are receiving positive or the negative kind of decision, so or the green lights to build it or not. In an ideal case, it should be if there is some risk of extension, it should be discussed within that environmental impact assessment. It should be stated within the report, and it should be brought to the Ministry of Environment, and then the respective authorities, they will decide. So unfortunately, I am not the person to say to respond to you concretely yes or no, or this is the case or not, because I'm responsible for the climate policy I can respond everything what is related directly to the climate policy, whether it's like a low-emission development strategy or negotiations or access to finance and etc. But the energy policy and the directions should be probably requested the response to the energy people of the Ministry of Economy. And sorry, I cannot say yes or no directly.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Maia. And Michael, so maybe you can give us some general observations of what Eastern Partnership will look like, should look like in the post-2020 period, and particularly in cooperation with Georgia.
Who's that? For me? No.
Sorry? Yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think the major point is that the Eastern Partnership, and within that the three associated countries, there is this question, what to do on climate policy and Green Deal, which are closely linked, of course. The three associated countries have already signaled that they are seriously interested in associating with the Green Deal. As far as I know, the European Union institutions themselves have not yet really responded to that. There is a considerable amount of superficial rhetoric coming out of official documents about the future of the Eastern Partnership, but as Bram has correctly noted, these are just headline words that mean nothing unless they are fully developed operationally, which has not yet been done. So my conclusion overall would be indeed to follow the guidelines in Bram's paper. By all means, look at what can be done at the level of the Eastern Partner 6, but as has just been pointed out, I mean, for example, Azerbaijan has very specific oil and gas interests, which the others do not. So take a realistic view as to what can be done with the other three Eastern partners and with respect to the three associates, and possibly Armenia, because Armenia in their new agreement with the EU has a big open door for approximation on energy and environment policies also. So for these 3 or 4 countries, work out who to work out. Both think tanks and national governments and the EU institutions all need to get to work out what a structured, substantial relationship would consist of. The Green Deal itself is up for much more detailed specification. As you know, Irina, you're working on it yourself. But as that becomes clearer, the potential for the 3 Eastern partners, the 3 associated partners to associate with this needs to be looked at very carefully. I'll just take one practical example, which is not really a big Georgian issue, but it's a very big Ukrainian issue. It is the use of coal in power generation. Already within the EU Green Deal, there is the idea that countries such as Poland, which have a very big coal burning problem, would get some kind of special regional fund treatment. Okay, fair enough, good idea, but then what about Ukraine? Because the Ukraine pollution through coal burning is of significance. I mean, significance to all of us. This is a big piece of pollution there. And in the Ukrainian case, the game is further complicated because the coal resources and power generating resources are largely controlled by an infamous oligarch, and so the politics of actually doing something on the Ukrainian side are themselves extremely difficult. So you've got really, as soon as you go beyond the headlines, that would be nice to have an Eastern Partnership climate deal, and with also the three countries, we've got to dig into the real issues and the costs of implementing significant policies. So that's all work ahead, but I think the good point and the essential conclusion I draw from this meeting is that we are all aware that there is something very important to be done, which is not yet done, and should be a collaborative, if you like, first of all, intellectual efforts by the governments of the three countries and the Eastern partners and of the EU and of the research organizations and think tanks all together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for these insightful comments. And indeed, the external dimension of the Green Deal should be taken seriously, and more cooperation should be embraced also in the neighborhood. And now we will need to conclude, and I would like to thank our panelists for your presentations, for your comments, and for participation in this webinar. And I pass the floor to Mr. Kakachia.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all of you for very interesting and insightful presentations. And I agree with Michael that I think that the role of think tanks here is very important. Of course, government role is more important, but role of think tanks to promote this idea and to get more knowledge, especially this type of like topics is kind of new. So when we talk about Europeanization, it's just not only the political term. It also brings some other issues, including Green Deal, digitalization, some others. So I think this is a huge process, and we need to work together. And I hope that we will have some other chances to continue this kind of conversation. And thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye.